Hello everyone and welcome to the How to Get Published webinar. Thank you for joining us for this presentation today. My name is Rohanna Karim, Group Marketing Manager for Authors at Sage. This 1-hour webinar will be recorded and archived for future viewing. We'll be sending out a link to the webinar recording and the slides to all registrants in the coming weeks. If any of you have problems with the audio or viewing mode during the webinar, please use the Q&A box at the right side of your screen. One of our helpful team members will get back to you ASAP. At the end of the webinar, we'll have some time for Q&A from attendees, so please feel free to also use the Q&A box to ask any questions to speakers throughout the webinar. As we're getting settled, we'd like to take a poll of who's here in the audience today. Please respond to the question prompts if you feel so inclined. So today we're focusing on what it takes to get published in an academic journal. Jessica Lipowski and our esteemed group of panelists will guide you through the publishing process, including what you can do to increase the chances of having your paper published, the timeline, how to disseminate your research upon acceptance, and more. Please allow me to introduce Jessica Lipowski, who will kick us off. Jessica is a publishing editor on the Science, Technology and Medicine Journals editorial team, based in our Los Angeles office. She manages a range of journals, working with editors and societies to develop new strategies and problem solve. I'd also like to welcome our esteemed panelists who are all editors-in-chief of a Sage journal. We have with us today Dr. Mary Beth Genter, Editor-in-Chief of International Journal of Toxicology, Heather Gether-Taylor, Editor-in-Chief of Public Personnel Management, Professor Richard Stackman, Co-Editor-in-Chief of Journal of Management Inquiry, Dr. Paul Terry, Editor-in-Chief of the American Journal of Health Promotion, and Professor Catherine Walsh, Editor-in-Chief of Palliative Medicine. So without further ado, let's get started. Over to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Rohanna, for that warm introduction. And thank you to everyone here for joining us today. I look forward to an informative and engaging discussion. Let's start with a broad overview of the publishing process. This chart illustrates a timeline of the typical author journey, moving from the earliest stages of securing funding and conducting research all the way through peer review and publication. Before we even dig into the meat of the presentation, let's discuss why you should even consider publishing your work. Publishing in a well-respected journal is a stamp of quality. If you have something new to contribute to your community, publishing in a journal is a way to ensure your findings reach the community and that the research is taken seriously. Once your research is published in a credible journal, you are demonstrating that your work has gone through peer review. Peer review provides validity, scrutiny, and improves quality through feedback. Getting published can also help advance your career, whether it contributes to a promotion or helps you secure tenure. Plus, publishing with a company like Sage means you as an author benefit from the highest production standards. Once it is available online and/or in print, you then have additional resources at your fingertips to help with dissemination, such as the article available online, included in international sales packages, assistance with promotion, and the option to publish your article fully open access if required by your institution or funder. Your work may even influence policies or patents in your field, shaping society as we know it today. But millions of journal articles are published each year. We suggest you ask yourself a few questions before you even start your research. Who is going to be interested? How does your research build on what we already know? How significant is your message? How sure are you of your findings? Is your work novel and innovative? Does it fill a gap or provide an extension of a theory? Perhaps it shows conventional wisdom was mistaken. Why are you wanting or needing to publish your work? What will it contribute to your field? At this point, during the webinar, you are probably ready to publish your work. Oftentimes, you spend months, even years, conducting research and gathering data, but the work certainly does not stop there. Sometimes writing the actual paper can be the most daunting. Getting published is hard and standards are high, but there are a few tips we can share that will help along the way to ensure you succeed. First off, ensure that your work is original. Avoid splitting one experiment into several papers, what is called salami slicing. Share the workload. Consider working with co-authors. You can allocate responsibilities and set each other deadlines and so forth. Read current journal articles in your field of study. Have you been thorough with your literature review? Once you are ready to sit down and put pen to paper, plan time to brainstorm. Writing takes time and energy. Be sure to take time to outline and organize your manuscript. Ensure you have enough material, research, and data. In mind, write for that journal. Once you've completed your first draft, resist the temptation of submitting it as soon as you have finished the paper. Let it breathe for a while and come back to it before submitting. Read, reread, and revise. And then ask a colleague to read it. Sleep on it again, then revise once more. Go over it multiple times and make sure all your key elements are there. Don't submit incomplete work and expect the journal editors or reviewers to do the job of finishing the paper for you. The Sage Author Gateway has a variety of resources, including links to English language editing service, author guidelines, the importance of search engines, how to get the title right, a FAQs page, and more. These resources we will not be covering in full today, but are incredibly helpful to reference when you may need some extra guidance. You might even consider finding an experienced writer to help you. Look to others who have been published before for guidance. It's important to think about who you should name as an author. Authorship consists of 4 criteria. Authors made a substantial contribution to the concept or design of the work, or in the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of the data, drafted the article or revised it critically for important intellectual content, will approve the version to be published, and participated sufficiently in the work to take public responsibility for appropriate portions of the content. Are there others that were involved but maybe don't meet all of these criteria? You can and should list them in the acknowledgement section. It's now time to consider which journal you would like to submit to. It is crucial to do your homework. At the core, you need to think about the best home for your paper. As you are exploring journals, think about what is the journal's reputation? What do your peers say about the journal? What type of papers does the journal publish? And what type of paper are you publishing? Is it empirical research, a review paper, brief report, or book review? Does the journal you're considering even publish these kinds of papers? Does your article reference publications that might be a good fit for your research? Does your paper fit within the aims and scopes of a journal you are eyeing? Who is the editor? Who sits on the editorial board? Are they highly cited in your field? How diverse is the editorial board? Do you know someone who has published in the journal already? Does the journal state the current rejection rate or turnaround time? What is the peer review policy? Is it single blind, double blind? Are the comments published openly? What is the readership of the journal? Is it a subscription-based or open access journal? Where is it indexed? What's its impact factor? Does it have one? What do the journal's key metrics tell you? Could publishing in this journal have an impact on your research? And does your institution have any restrictions on where you can submit articles? Perhaps it requires an impact factor or a certain license. Does the journal you are looking at provide an open access option if needed? Be on the lookout for predatory publishers. These are often journals who don't do proper peer review and are on the rise. Look for inclusion in indices like Scopus or PubMed and thorough publication policies. Once you decide to which journal you'd like to submit, spend some time reading the manuscript submission guidelines for that particular journal and follow them. We cannot emphasize enough how much editors appreciate the effort you put in. If you do not follow the guidelines, there is a large chance your paper might be unsubmitted and sent back for adjustments before even being considered. As you are getting ready to submit, just like you did with writing, make every effort to improve the quality of your manuscript and try to be objective about your work. Write for that journal's particular audience. Read the aims and scope and tailor your manuscript accordingly. Make sure to include in your submission any funding, conflict of interest, and ethics statements, even if you have nothing to declare. Be sure your article is structured properly. The outline we highlight here is most common, but the journal you are submitting to will have the appropriate structure you should follow in their manuscript submission guidelines. The introduction should identify a clear, compelling statement of purpose. In addition, it might cover a short literature review. What's the purpose of the study? What was the hypothesis you wanted to prove? What did you research? What is the question you are addressing? The methodology section should be clear, meaningful, answerable, interrelated, and flow logically from the introduction. As this section implies, you should discuss the methodology used. There should be enough information present in terms of the procedures and/or measures for readers to trust the data or reproduce it. What did you do? What was your technique? How many patients did you use, and how did you select them? It's important to include any relevant materials or methods used, including ethical approval you needed to acquire. The analysis and discussion will follow. It helps to have tables and figures as this speeds comprehension. The results section discusses the key findings, while discussion covers what the results mean. What is the impact of previous studies in relation to the present study? How is the data of the new trial related to totality? How does this answer the question in the introduction? Finally, the conclusion brings awareness to the limitations and doesn't go beyond the evidence. It might even outline future studies needed. But if no one reads your findings, what is the use of disseminating your research? Help readers find your article with a well-written title and abstract. Keywords are still important in optimizing the discoverability of your article. To maximize search engine optimization, or SEO, and gain traction, it is important to choose keywords carefully. Include your keywords in your title and your abstract. Repeat the most important ones where appropriate and without losing the natural flow of the language. It's key to keep in mind what users are likely to be typing into Google or another search engine when looking for your article. With a strong title, abstract, and keyword list, there is more chance for your work being discovered, read, and cited. You're getting close. Now it's time to go through a mental checklist. Are you adhering to the journal's word limit for your type of manuscript? Have you used the right references, for instance, Harvard, APA, AMA, Vancouver, or Chicago style? Ensure there are no identifying features in your manuscript to facilitate blind peer review. Has permission been obtained for use of copyrighted material from other sources, including the web? Have you proofread your manuscript before submitting? Have you provided a cover letter if the journal requires it? If so, keep it short and highlight the relevant features in the letter. Have you considered including supplemental material to your submission, like data sets or audio recordings? Will it add value to the content? Go through the manuscript submission guidelines for that journal one more time. It's possible editors might not even take a look at your manuscript for several reasons. Some common reasons for this include authors not thoroughly reviewing submission guidelines, incorrect formatting of tables and figures, the topic not being an appropriate fit for the journal, sending in the wrong manuscript type, or poor grammar and syntax. If there's one thing you take away from this webinar, be sure to read and follow the author's submission guidelines. Write for the journal you are submitting to. Perhaps you are not quite ready to submit to a peer-reviewed journal and instead would like to quickly disseminate your research to your colleagues in your field and gather feedback. There are numerous preprint servers you can submit to based on the kind of research you do. Preprints are websites that allow you to upload the first version of your manuscript and gather feedback from your peers immediately. Please note, preprint servers are not peer-reviewed, but allow quick dissemination of your work before publishing your work in a peer-reviewed academic journal. SAGE has its own preprint server in humanities and social sciences called Advance. Want to get involved in Advance? We are looking for volunteers from the academic research community to help shape Advance's vision. If you are interested, please reach out in the Q&A box and let us know. After all of that legwork, you feel you are finally ready to submit. Be sure to only submit to one journal at a time. Send in your manuscript via the journal's preferred submission system, usually an online manuscript submission system like ScholarOne manuscripts, and follow the steps outlined in the platform. In addition to the reasons we've already mentioned on why your article may not make it past the first round, I want to mention your article might flat out be rejected due to the methodology section. Be sure your methods section is strong and that you have thoroughly conducted a literature review. You have finally received notification that your article is going out for peer review. What exactly is peer review? Peer review is essential to the development of research across all subject areas. Peer review helps filter out poor quality articles, assesses the validity of science behind the manuscript, and helps maintain scientific integrity. There are three main types of peer review: single-blind, double-blind, and open. Single-blind is where the name of the reviewer is hidden from the author. Double-blind means names are hidden from both the reviewers and the authors. Open peer review, which is only embraced by a few journals at the moment, is when everyone is openly identified. If the journal embraces single or double-blind peer review, please know that reviewer confidentiality is strictly maintained. Be sure to understand which type of peer review the journal you are submitting to embraces so you can properly blind your manuscript upon submission. Majority of SAGE journals use the platform SAGE Track, which is powered by ScholarOne. Some of you may know it previously as Manuscript Central. Once a paper is submitted, the editor determines if it fits within the journal's scope. You can find the aims and scope on the journal website. If the paper does not fit the aims and scope, or perhaps it recently published a paper on this topic, the paper will be desk rejected. Perhaps the editor sees initial fatal flaws. If it passes the initial checklist, however, your paper will most likely be sent out for peer review. The paper is sent out to at least 2 or 3 reviewers who are subject experts in your field. Reviewers assess and make recommendations to the editor, which will be one of the following: reject, pending major revisions, pending minor revisions, or accept. Please note that peer review takes time and is not something that happens overnight. Reviewers spend hours on each manuscript, diligent reviewing papers in his or her field. We encourage you to consider peer reviewing papers as well. Ultimately, the editor makes the final decision. It's possible you may face a rejection. In this instance, the reviewers were probably not convinced of the contribution to the knowledge base. Perhaps the methods are not robust enough for the journal, or specific sections are weak. Weak methodology could be, for example, too few observations on quantitative papers, or lacking transparency of qualitative methods. Maybe your paper was ill-focused or fundamentally flawed in their opinion. Try to take the rejection in stride and not take it personally if you can. Criticisms are there to enhance your paper. Read the reviewer comments and editor's letter carefully. Focus on why the manuscript was rejected and rework the paper to address reviewer concerns. Perhaps you can resubmit to the same journal, or maybe you have another journal in mind that may be a better fit after you make the recommended revisions. If you've made it through the next round, it is very rare for papers to be accepted without any revisions whatsoever. Most likely you will see accept pending major revisions or accept pending minor revisions. Read the reviewer comments and editor's letter carefully. Follow the time frames requested. Once you are ready to resubmit, clearly demonstrate what you have changed point by point. Address each referee point in a separate document. In addition, we recommend highlighting changes in the document as well, because this makes it easier for reviewers and editors to compare the point-by-point response to the revised document. For example, ask authors to submit a highlighted revision and a clean revision. The clean revision is ultimately what production uses to create the final publication if the paper is accepted. If you can't meet all the criticisms, explain why in a positive, polite manner. Keep in mind, this revision process may take 2 or 3 iterations. Congratulations! After all of that work, your paper has been accepted. But the work doesn't stop there. Does it ever? Upon acceptance, you'll sign the contributor agreement before the appropriate materials are sent over to our production team. The article starts out by going through copy editing and typesetting. You will then have another chance to review your article in its final proof form. The editor will review your article at this stage too, and once all the edits are compiled, a new proof is generated. The article will then be published online ahead of print, what Sage calls online first. This means your article is fully discoverable and readers can already download and cite your work even if it is not yet placed in a print issue. Now it's time to celebrate and share your findings with the world. You'll want to be sure to promote your article to drive downloads and citations. Share your work on social media such as Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, post to relevant blogs and scholarly communication networks, and notify your colleagues and peers. You can even explore issuing a press release via your institution, which could lead to broader news pickup. Sage has some great guides on how to promote your article. The Sage Author Gateway is Sage's dedicated space for author support and services. Visit the website for more resources, tips, and tricks while writing. Also outlined is which version of your paper you can share, where, and when. We also have a Chinese Author Gateway that features translated materials. Still looking for additional guidance? We have an online learning platform called Sage Campus, on which we offer a course on how to get published. We also have a 3-part video series with some great tips and tricks we've covered today. Plus, we have a handy PDF guide you can reference and easily share with colleagues. We have an esteemed group of editors here with us today who would briefly like to share their thoughts and tips on how to get published. Please note that each editor is speaking from his or her experience and that each journal process is slightly different. What may work for one journal may not work for another, and the same can be said for preferences. We encourage you to take that in stride as you move through the publication process. Without further ado, I would first like to introduce Mary Beth Genter, Editor-in-Chief of International Journal of Toxicology.
Hello, everyone. Yes, this is Mary Beth, and International Journal of Toxicology has been around since about 1982, and I've been editor for about 10 years now. And probably the biggest issue I see with manuscripts coming in is that they are out of scope. You know, people don't pay attention to the submission guidelines. But the other thing that I find that I'm paying more and more attention to is the fact that authors don't really put any energy into those key words that Jessica mentioned. That is so important to the discoverability of your paper. But from a somewhat selfish perspective, we as editors like to see our papers cited. So I encourage you to really think about those keywords on how are people going to find your paper, and so that you get credit as well as the journal publishing gets credit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth. Heather, I would like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, and hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be a part of this session today, and I thought I'd just speak for a moment about the writer and reviewer relationship, and just to comment on a few things that have been mentioned previously that are very important to us, especially at Public Personnel Management, but I know at a number of journals, of course. First of all is to remember that the peer review process does take time. And so I would encourage authors, prospective authors, to be patient with that process, remembering that getting reviews that we need to make our decisions do take time, sometimes longer than we expect. And so we greatly appreciate your patience with that process. Secondly, something that was brought up earlier is just to be very responsive to the review feedback. Even if there are things that you disagree with, please tell us why you disagree, how you might respond differently. And that's very helpful to understanding how you have addressed all of the reviewer concerns. And then finally, I would encourage everyone who is a prospective author to also remember that the success of our journals rests on reviewer investments as well. So just as you submit your work for review, we ask that you also serve as reviewers. And keep in mind that we are collectively dependent on one another as authors and reviewers. And so I want to thank you in advance for being generous reviewers too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, and hello, everybody. It's truly a pleasure to be a part of this webinar. I have 2 points that I want to make. The first is, please review the last 2 to 4 issues of the journal, because that really gives you a flavor of the journal scope and mission. For example, the Journal of Management Inquiry, which has been around for 30 years, only publishes qualitative papers. And in fact, over its history, we've only published 1 paper with a p-value. And we're also known for our essays, as we do not publish review papers. The second thing that I would advise is, there's been comments about the focus on the paper, but our first real introduction to your paper is the abstract. So make sure that you take the time necessary to write a clear and, I would say, crisp abstract, because that's what invites both the editors and ultimately the readers of the paper. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Paul, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Nice job on this presentation. If everybody follows every step, I'm pretty sure they're going to get published. But let me also, like Richard, add 2 tips that come to mind for me. I especially want to emphasize Jessica's point about how does your research build on what we know, with 2 tips. First, to reiterate what Richard just said, most of our decisions about putting a paper into the review process is entirely based on the abstract, at least at the American Journal of Health Promotion. So just as Richard said, I would build on what Richard said by saying, do not bury the lead. Help us understand early and a couple of times during the abstract what it is that this paper contributes, especially new to the literature. There's certainly nothing wrong with revalidating and re-studying questions from the past, but we get especially excited in journals when we can share discovery and share something new. So really work hard on the so what of your paper and make sure that shows up in the abstract. And then a real focus of mine, especially if I have a paper where it's on the cusp and I'm really not sure if it's adding something new to the literature, I really dive into the discussion section. And too often, I observe that too many writers basically reiterate their results section all over again in their discussion section. I think that's really a loss. Use the discussion section to share your opinion, share your expertise, share your leadership, share your thoughts about what you found that's different than what's been found in the past, what you found that really affirms and is important to have us move forward with confidence in how your findings support old findings. But really share the excitement of your discovery, your opinions about how the discovery is important in the discussion section. It's your chance to really be an eloquent and persuasive writer and use it to good effect. So thanks for the opportunity, Jessica.
Oh, thank you, Paul, for joining us, and to all of you panelists for joining and sharing your tips and tricks. Last but not least, I wanted to pass it over to you, Catherine.
Okay, thanks very much. So I'm Catherine, and I'm Editor-in-Chief of Palliative Medicine, a role that I've held for about the last 7 or 8 years. So I wanted just to endorse everything that the panelists have already said. If you want to submit something to Palliative Medicine, you'd be wise to listen to what they said, which I think is an important message about what editors want, irrespective of the field within which people work. The two things I just wanted to add was, first of all, certainly for our journal, for many, many other journals, remember you are writing for an international audience. You know, our journal is read literally across the world. So you need to position it for that audience. You need to draw from an international literature base. And we know for some work that we've done, certainly in our field of palliative care, we're not great at doing that. We need to draw broadly from the policy context, not just of our own country, but outside that. And we need to explain what we're talking about. You know, words in American do not mean the same as words in English, for example. And the context within which, in my field, we provide healthcare is completely different in different countries across the world. So you cannot assume that a reader shares your understanding of some of the core concepts that you might be talking about. So you need to be very clear in terms of explaining that and positioning it for that reader who may well not understand the context within which your research was conducted. And the second thing I say is that, you know, we touched on this in the presentation, you're preparing for this publication from the moment you have your research idea. We can work with you on a discussion section, for example. We can't make your science any better than it is. If you've not planned your research project well, used the right design to answer an appropriate question and conducted it robustly, our answer's probably going to be no, irrespective of anything else that you might do. But then you need to sell that to us, and I'd suggest that people have a look at the Equator Network and the reporting guidelines within that, which give you a very clear recipe, for example, for reporting some of the types of research that you'll certainly find within our journal. So the resource is there, use it. Thanks.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you everyone for your informative tips and tricks and this really engaging discussion. As you notice, we still have some time left. We really wanted to leave time to answer questions that have been coming in and allow you the opportunity to ask questions both of myself from the SAGE perspective, or direct any of your questions directly to any of the editors-in-chief here. So please continue to send in your questions to the question box on the right side of your screen. If we can't get to your question by the end of the hour, myself and our speakers have agreed to address them in an FAQs document, which will be posted on the SAGE website. So one of the questions that I see that's come in here is, do you have to pay SAGE to get an article published? So this comes down to the publishing model, whether it's a traditional subscription journal or an open access journal. Traditional subscription journals do not have any cost to publish in that journal. You might pay for color figures to be published in print, but that would be extra. If it's a traditional journal, so that would be a subscription journal behind a paywall available to subscribers, you do have the option to publish open access, what we call SAGE Choice. This has an article processing charge of $3,000 US and allows you to publish your article under a CC BY license. Sometimes this is required from an institution or funder. SAGE also has completely open access journals, which is the journal is free to read, it's not behind a paywall, and those article processing charges, or APCs, can vary. If you visit that journal website, it will be clearly outlined if it's a fully open access journal or if it's free to publish. Going through here, I'm just continuing to go through some of the questions. I have another question here. Is there an easy way to tell if a journal is a predatory journal? So one of the easiest ways to tell this is take a look at the journal website. Is it transparent in the publication process? Is it clear that it's a peer-reviewed journal? Google or search for the editor-in-chief and their name, who sits on that editorial board. Transparency is key. Also, if you do receive an email from them and it is riddled with spelling mistakes and poor grammar, that would be another way to tell. But it's not always 100% that. You can also see where it's indexed. It may not have an impact factor and it may not be indexed in Medline, but is it indexed in Scopus? Is it indexed in the Directory of Open Access Journals, the DOAJ? So there's a few things that you can look at. Let's see here, carrying through. I have a question here around if there's someone that wants to be a reviewer, how do you sign up to be a reviewer? The best thing we recommend for that is reach out to journals in your field that you might be interested in reviewing for. Many editors will ask for a CV or some of your credentials to show that you do have expertise in that particular field, and then we can add you into the database. Typically, we'll ask for first name, last name, institution or organization, your institutional email address, and any keywords that might be relevant when searching to match those reviewers.
Could I just add there?
Of course.
It's Catherine Walsh here. Just about the keywords. I can't tell you how many people in our database have a keyword of palliative care, which we are a palliative care journal. That's sort of taken for granted. And if I'm searching for somebody to review a paper, I won't find you. So can I really encourage people to use clear, specific keywords that will guide us to particular topics within the overarching field, because we have a large database of reviewers that we pull from, and I won't find you or remember that you're interested in reviewing if your keywords are insufficiently specific.
Thank you, Catherine. Okay. I have a question for Richard here. How can you make relevant a study from the South to an audience from the North to help chances of publication? Are there any specific times when a journal publishes articles related to a particular field?
Okay, hello, this is Richard. If I understand the question, what I'm hearing is the focus of the study is on a given region, South versus the North. And luckily for JMI, we are also an international journal. Well over half of our submissions come from outside the US, and we're quite pleased and fortunate with that. Regarding the sample, that is not as big an issue, and it goes back to what Paul said, is it gets into, once you've done your data analysis, discussed your results, how do you then in your discussion section and then follow up in the contributions with respect to what you've learned from that sample, from that given region or country, and how it extends our understanding of the focus of your journal. So, the Journal of Management Inquiry could publish a paper on motivation, and there may actually be some really key contributions, say, from a study in South America that extends our understanding of motivation theory, or it could sort of invert our understanding of aspects of motivation. So it really comes less about the sample and more about the contribution to our understanding and the extension of our understanding. I hope that answers the question.
Hey, Jessica, can I build on that as well?
Of course, please.
It's Paul. Richard and I are like-minded, it seems. The other thing I'd add to Richard's point is that sometimes articles, and we too, as much as we're called the American Journal of Health Promotion, we get probably almost a third of our submissions are international. If I get a very select population from Iran or South Korea or Brazil, which is not uncommon for our journal, I often fret that they seem to be putting too much focus on the unique nature of the sample, which makes me struggle with how it'll generalize to our U.S. readers, where instead I wish they would perhaps de-emphasize the rather highly specialized population of healthcare nurses, for example, in South Korea, and instead emphasize how this is the nature of their unique intervention. This is the size of their impressive population. These are the results that they moved via this study's intervention. Those things are all generalizable. So I would put less emphasis on your unique population and more emphasis on your treatment and your results.
Thank you. Thank you. Great points and great discussion around this. I'm going to shift a little bit to another question that has come in, and I want to open this up to the panelists if they'd like to chime in. Do you consider the purpose of the literature review in the introduction to be a comprehensive review of the available literature, or a way to direct readers to the evidence supporting a statement made in the text? That is it important to cite all available references on a topic or just those that support the statement being made?
This is Mary Beth. I could dive in here if that's okay.
Absolutely.
We encourage our writers to basically tailor the literature review to kind of set up the question that they're asking in the paper. In the course of like writing a complete dissertation, a student might need to review that entire body of related literature. But I encourage my authors to kind of tailor it such that the literature that really sets up the question that they're trying to answer is addressed in that literature review.
This is Heather. I just want to second what Mary Beth just said and note that a lot of review feedback focuses on literature reviews that are not narrowly enough tailored, that are unfocused. And so I would encourage authors to keep in mind what she just said.
Yeah, and to add to that, it's Catherine here. We do publish systematically constructed literature reviews. So we're clearly not expecting something like that to introduce an empirical research study. I think the literature there needs to be focused on why the area is important, to give the reader an appreciation of some of perhaps the key literature in that area that has led you to the question that you ask, and finally to really understand why the question needs answering. All researchable questions don't necessarily need to be researched. So it's not just about demonstrating there's a gap in knowledge, but about helping the reader to understand why this research is needed to actually fill that gap. So it's not just about demonstrating what you know, it's about demonstrating why that's important in a very succinct and focused manner.
Yeah, and this is Richard. Of course, I second everything that's been said. From a very pragmatic standpoint, you, for example, with JMI, you only have 40 pages. And so if you become overly concerned to make sure that you cover everything on a given topic, you're going to run out of space quickly. So it is really about focusing and maybe not being so concerned that you cover everything, but spend the time. And this may be the one section that you really continue to work on and revise before you submit it. If you have overlooked something, that will come out in the review process. And sending them out for blind peer review, we send papers out to experts. And in many ways, some of the best feedback you will get is when a reviewer says, you've missed this point, and it would enhance your discussion and your contributions. And that's what I would hope the review process would lead to.
Thank you, everyone. This is a fantastic discussion and great questions coming in. Thank you so much. Just a few quick questions I wanted to touch base on. There was a question that came in on, is there a tool to select the best journal for our manuscript? Every publisher has different tools available, and at Sage we have something called Sage Path, and you can submit directly to Sage Path. That's P-A-T-H. And we have an in-house team of managing editors that will help triage your manuscript and find the best home for it. And then that could be one tool that you might want to utilize as you're looking for the right home for your paper. But ultimately, going through some of the other tips that we had discussed, this recording will be circulated, so you can go back and review those. And I had another question come in of course, sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to add, I think something that's been implied throughout, this is Richard, implied throughout this, is your colleagues are some of your best resources with respect to not only writing the paper, but finding a home for the paper. And as you're working on your paper, and it takes time, you will likely have gone to a conference or two. So that's where you should be talking to people about, the joy that you're finding in writing this paper, why the topic interests you, and you will get feedback on best outlets for that, or you may want to consider this journey. So really also rely on colleagues.
Thank you. Another quick one I wanted to touch on, are there scholarships just for publication fees, like those article processing charges that you might want for publishing fully open access? Most times authors are not paying for that out of pocket. A lot of times that comes in terms of grant funding or through your institution or different funding. So take a look at some of those options there. Let's see. In terms, I have another quick one I wanted to address here. Does Sage accept APA format for references? With this, yes, some journals do work in APA style, but read the author submission guidelines for the particular journal to which you are submitting, and that will tell you the appropriate reference style that you should be using in formatting your manuscript. If you're looking for specific journals, you can go to sagepub.com. You can browse all of our journals by discipline. You can search by keyword or title if you're looking for a comprehensive list there. We have some questions around embargo periods. I will follow up with those after our webinar and include some links and follow-up resources. Here we go. Let's see what else. We have so many fantastic questions coming in here. I want to make sure we can get to all of them. Let's see. All right. This one is an interesting one that I would love to hear from the panelists, one or two of you. Is there any good period or time of year to send an article in order to increase its chance of acceptance?
Catherine here, no. That's a that's a quick answer. We get papers submitted relatively steadily throughout the year. So at times that you might think are down times in the academic cycle, like the summer holidays or other holiday periods, that's often when academics are working on their papers. So the only time for us is when we do a call for papers for a special issue, and we get a massive response to that, which might slow down our response to either those papers or other papers. But it doesn't make any difference whatsoever as to whether we accept them or not, because our criteria in terms of contribution to knowledge and robust science remain the same, whatever time of year it is.
This is Mary Beth. I agree completely with Catherine.
This is Richard. I agree completely too.
Thank you,
Heather.
I would go ahead.
I would just add one quick thing, is that keep in mind that many authors are thinking about the semester calendar and having deadlines to submit by the end of the semester. And just know from an editorial standpoint, we realize that lots of people are thinking about that. So and also it often coincides with holiday breaks. So keep in mind that peer review does take time, and we're often dealing with times when we're seeing an overwhelming number of submissions. So keep that in mind as you manage your process.
We actually had a question come in touching on that, so maybe we can carry on. Peer review does take time, and authors do understand that to an extent. At what point, we've had a couple questions come in here. At what point is it okay to follow up with the editor or the journal? Is there a particular time frame that you would recommend?
This is Mary Beth. I think it depends to some extent on what the journal's expected turnaround time is. And for example, our expected turnaround time is 3 weeks from the time a reviewer accepts the invitation. But I might have a reviewer accept the invitation this week and another one next week, so that puts us on a 4-week cycle. So my rule of thumb, at least for my journal, would be a month. I wouldn't mind hearing from you at all if you're getting a little antsy and you might think that you'd like to know what's going on with your paper.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'd add to that is, we publish on our website our normal time to first response. So again, just to have a look at some of the norms, but also to say it's absolutely fine to contact us and you will get a response. But please don't continue to contact us, because we will be dealing with your paper whether you've emailed us or not. It won't be forgotten. We know it's there in the system, and we'll be working hard, whether that be trying to find reviewers or looking at reviewer comments or whatever it may well be in terms of where it is in the system. And actually it takes us away from that core task if we have to spend a lot of time answering emails from anxious authors. So whilst we're absolutely fine with people dropping us an email, emailing us every week to see what the progress is just going to take our time and not actually help the process at all. We take your submissions very seriously, and we work to process them as fast as we possibly can. And the electronic systems we have now means that we don't forget a paper. We know that it's there in the system. It's not hidden on my desk.
The other thing I'll mention too is sometimes we get conflicting reviews from reviewers. This is Mary Beth again. And so sometimes, you know, at the end of that 3-week time period, I might have 2 reviews that are telling me completely different things. And we may need to go and seek another opinion. So that is going to add time, but it also adds to the quality of the review that we can get back to our authors.
Yeah, it's Paul. I'd reinforce everything you've heard. Our turnaround time is more in the month neighborhood, keeping in mind that our peer reviewers are volunteers. We're not paying them to do that. And as much as some say yes, that they'll be willing to review something, some occasionally just don't come through for us. So we have to send it out for another volunteer. And so our 4 weeks, I'm afraid, could get into 6 weeks, if not 8 weeks sometimes, because then obviously our composite editors have to make, just as was mentioned, sense out of potentially conflicting reviews. So as much as at our journal, we were doing our darndest the last couple of years to shorten our overall lead time. We have high rejection rates, and it's been mentioned already, and I can't underscore enough how if you do feel a need to follow up, be courteous about it and be understanding that your paper is going to get worked on whether you follow up with us or not.
Yeah, and can I also add in terms of the time scale, increasingly because people are busy, you know, it's not unusual now for, certainly in our field, because I know it's the same with, you know, some of my colleague editors in other journals in our field, to have to approach 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 people to find 2 or 3 reviewers. And each one of those might take a week or 2 weeks to actually say yes or no to our invitation. And that builds in an awful lot of delay. So even though we might send out the invitation to a new reviewer as soon as a no bounces in, that is still going to add time onto the system, because as you quite rightly say, it absolutely depends on a volunteer workforce who are doing it in their spare time. And I would add to that editors also usually, certainly I do, have a full-time other job as well. So, you know, we're fitting editing in around other things as well. So be kind to us.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and a very special thank you to all the editors who joined us as panelists today. In the coming weeks, please be on the lookout for an email that includes a link to view the webinar and the slides. Thanks, everyone.